technically, Marc Marquez has not yet wrapped up the 2025 MotoGP World Championship, but that is not going to stop any of us from starting to talk about next year. Welcome to another edition of Monday Morning MotoGP, and we are talking about the Misano Grand Prix that happened this past weekend. But before we get into all of that, if you could please like, follow, share, subscribe, mash all the buttons so you can get all the MotoGP content you can possibly imagine. And fun little fact, we tend to respond to every single comment, so come talk some MotoGP with us. All right, so we have a lot to talk about. I mean, we have people once again in Italy cheering for Marc Marquez crashing, and then Marc Marquez shoving it right up their nose the following day. We've got some very, let's say, passionate MotoGP riders with some very, well, let's call them un-Italian hand gestures that we should talk about. And also Yamaha unveiled its brand new V4 on the track during a race weekend. Yes, we've seen it in testing, but it was racing this weekend. And finally, is Marco Bezzecchi Marc Marquez's top contender for next season in MotoGP? So let's first get into it. I think I made my opinions of this very, very clear the last time it happened. Is I'm not a big fan of booing riders on the podium that you don't like or cheering when other riders crash. You are all free to do what you feel makes you feel great to be a spectator of this sport we love so much. I just think, it's a little classless. Again, you can react to things however you'd like, but me personally, I have learned over the course of my life, I'm an old man now, I can say things like that, I have learned that that you shouldn't really cheer for things that could have the potential for a bad outcome. Now, when I was younger and you'd see a big hit in the NFL and like a linebacker just taking out a wide receiver, I mean, we would stand up out of our chairs and we would cheer and we would shout, especially, if that was happening for our team. And then you realize that guy on the ground might not be getting up. And you're cheering for the hit on a now unconscious human being. I remember being at a bar when I was younger, and I heard a boom from the kitchen. And a waitress had dropped a bunch of glasses. And the whole table, myself included, went, "Fumble!" Ha-ha, because we're super funny in a bar drunk. And it turned out that waitress had tripped and fallen on a carafe of glassware and cut herself to pieces. And as she was being wheeled out on a gurney by the paramedics, we all kind of felt like crap for trying to make a joke at what turned out to be her expense. So the same thing happens when a rider crashes in MotoGP. A rider goes down, and yes, the Marc Marquez crash didn't look very serious from the get-go. He hopped right up, slammed the air fence, and walked away. We know he's okay. But getting out of the habit for cheering for the demise of others, I think it's a good habit to try to break. So as much as, yes, it's a free country, it's a free world, go ahead and react however you want. Don't be surprised when other people look at you with a little bit of a raised eyebrow. It is classless. It is lame. Cheer for your guy, cheer for your team. And when your team wins, that's worth cheering for. And when you beat the opposition, that's worth cheering for your guy. And when you get beat, take it like a man. Why do so many of y'all take it like little, tiny babies? And that's what y'all are. You little babies. And it's kind of gross to see. And what makes it worse for MotoGP, in MotoGP, it seems the more you boo Marc Marquez, the more you cheer when he hits the deck, the more he comes and rams it right down your throat the next day. So if you want to give the guy more motivation, I guess keep on booing. Keep on cheering him. Keep on calling him Marc Crash in the comments. He's going to win the title by a whole lot of points this season. His passion trumps yours just a little bit when he gets to lift the hardware. And if we've learned anything over the course of the past few seasons with Marc Marquez, everyone counted this guy down and out, career over. He would never win again. He'd never win another title again. I read your comments online. I saw them all. Oh, he's finished. He's done. He's cooked. It's over. Sure. Count Marc Marquez out at your peril. He's like all the greats in every other sport. You may not like Michael Jordan or Tom Brady or LeBron James or Steph Curry, whoever it is. You might love to cheer against them and you love to hate them because they're very, very good. but it's really hard to keep the greats subdued forever. And after a while, you're the one that has to eat the crap. It's just how it goes. And Marc's going to win the championship probably next time out in Japan, but at least he didn't win it this week, not in Italy, so you have that to go back on. So let's focus a little elsewhere, because I do want to talk about the passion in motorsports. And we see this a lot with, Fabio Quartararo. We've seen him this year banging the tank of that Yamaha when things don't go this way. We see the head shakes, we see the chatter, and then we see him slamming the tank and coming into the garage, and he's super flustered. And I've seen a lot of people talk about how classless they think he is and what a whiny little baby he is. But at the same time, then we saw this weekend Pedro Acosta giving the old middle finger to his KTM when it threw a chain. And the KTM has had a little bit of a reliability problem, so is all of that completely unwarranted? No, probably not. Do you like to see it? I'll leave that to you, whether you think the types of hand gestures and frustration being pounded on screens and things like that are actually warranted, or a little baby activity. Like, that's completely up to you. But I will say the alternative is tasteless. And not tasteless in bad taste. I'm saying tasteless as in bland. I think we want our sports heroes to be passionate about what they're doing. They're doing it at the highest level, and these guys are riding around track at 200 plus miles an hour, and they're getting off the bike, and then they're expected to articulate specific feedback to make the bike better. If you know anything about heart rate, when your heart rate is elevated, you're in the midst of a barroom brawl, it's not when you're normally thinking the clearest. Fight or flight kicks in, your emotions are running high, the fists are ready to fly. You're not going to sit down and then do math problems. That's what we're expecting these guys to do. We're expecting them to ride as hard as they can, try to win, undercut people, risk crashing. And then when something goes wrong, hop off the bike and go, well, oh well. We can do that, and it might be, again, your preference. I prefer to see riders who really, really care. And yes, sometimes we call it passion and it seems like they're spoiled children. There's part of that too. But I think the alternative to seeing riders have passion, to seeing riders punching the tank, you don't know if he's pissed at the bike or pissed at himself. Because I've seen a lot of you guys misinterpret that, saying, oh, Fabio Quartararo just blames the motorcycle. And then he comes straight off the bike and goes, I screwed up. I made a mistake. I went too hot into that corner. I did this, I did that. I'm the first one to say, I get maddest at myself when I make a mistake. I'm the one pounding the tank on the motorcycle because this idiot screwed up. So you're not inside his head. You don't know what he's thinking. I think you all can calm down just a little bit with the, well, he's such a spoiled brat. He's such a little baby, pounding the tank. Now, I think where you are a little bit right is where it pertains to kids and child athletes. And what are we teaching the next generation of great athletes? Are we teaching them that stomping around being upset is passion? Or are we teaching them that, hey, maybe a little humility, self-reflection is where it needs to be, and you don't have to stomp around like the pros do? We see this in all facets. We see this leaking into Little League and kids golf and go-karting, where these kids are now acting like the professional athletes. That's what's going to happen. I remember being in my backyard emulating Joe Montana. That's who I wanted to be. So you're going to take those behaviors, and that's what you're going to exhibit on the field yourself, even when you're 10, 12 years old. But I will say, no one in the MotoGP paddock is raising your kids. So yes, could they put a better example forward for the young riders and the young people coming up? Of course they could. But it's also your job as a parent watching MotoGP with your kid to be like, hey, he's full of passion there. He's racing for millions and millions of dollars. That's not the kind of behavior I want to see out of you. So don't ask motorcycle riders to raise your kids. That's basically what I'm saying. Unless you are a motorcycle racer, then raise your kids. For God's sakes, raise your kids. All right, so who's raising kids? Well, a kid motorcycle, Yamaha, with that brand new V4 this weekend at Misano during race time, during race trim, running in a crowd, seeing how they stack up against the best in the world, because let's make no bones about it, Yamaha is moving to that V4. That is the future. That's where they are going. That is the potential machine that is going to be taking over next year and beyond. So they needed to see how it acted in a race weekend. And for those of you who don't really know what that means, well, it means a few things, because in testing, there's no time constraints. You have all the time in the world to do a few laps, come in, make the adjustments, talk it to death, go back out, do a few more laps, talk it to death underneath race conditions where you have shortened sessions, you have a very short time to get it right, and you're on track with all the other teams at the exact same time. You're running in a crowd, you're running against the pace, you're seeing where you stack up with conditions that are all the same. Like, I could do great lap times. I could set the lap record at a track, and then you come the next day and you're a faster rider than me, but you have to ride in the rain, or it's much colder or much hotter. Comparing those lap times, apples to oranges. So now they put the Yamaha on track at the same exact time as the other inline 4 Yamahas, which is super important to see how it stacks up against the bike they're currently running during a race weekend. And not only that, they get to see how they stack up against the other bikes on the grid, and most importantly maybe, how the bike interacts in a crowded race field. Now, how did they do? Friday, I will be honest, didn't look too horrible. It looked like Augusto Fernandez was running about the same lap times on that V4 as he did on the inline 4 before, which is great if you're talking about that inline 4 has been through years and years and years of development, and this V4 is brand new. If it's already up to speed with him, that's fantastic news. Saturday was a little humbling for them. They didn't do well in qualifying, they didn't do well in the sprint, and what Augusto Fernandez was kind of saying is that there's a very narrow band where this motorcycle is working. There's a very narrow window where they can set the bike up that makes the bike run well. So on Monday it could run great, on Tuesday it's not going to run so perfect because they're making little tiny adjustments, they're trying to make it better, and then you go outside that operating window that is the perfect sweet spot. Now, I do think, and I'm not a bike developer, but I do think that sounds kind of normal for developing a motorcycle, because as you try to figure out what works and what doesn't, you get rid of the parts that don't work, you bring in new stuff that does, you start getting used to the characteristics of the bike and riding that bike the way it needs to be ridden. You can't ride the inline 4 like the V4 and vice versa. We've seen this as riders and teams switch from different manufacturers. You can't ride the Honda like you ride the Ducati. Marc said that last year. I'm still riding the Ducati like I ride the Honda. There's different characteristics of every single bike. So they have to go through these growing pains to figure it out. I think overall the weekend for Yamaha and that V4 has to be considered at least a little bit successful, even if underwhelming. It's the first step in a very, very long road to making this team come back to the front. And now we're going to see in the Misano test on Monday what they do there. It's not a private test, so maybe we'll get some numbers of actually what's going on in that test on Monday. A lot of their teams are going to be out there, so a lot more potential to have stuff leaked to the public. So we'll see exactly where that Yamaha stacks up from that Monday test, and if we get any other insight into how much further the bike has to be before we really see it, you can't call it competitive. Why can't we call it competitive? Well, none of the full-time MotoGP Yamaha riders are going to get to ride this bike in race trim this year. And it's not because of the engine. Forget that. I know a lot of you say, well, they can't just swap engines in the middle of the season. Yes, they can. They have concessions. They're allowed to open that up and put in a brand new engine into that motorcycle, and Quartararo could ride it. The problem is the bike for that engine has to be redesigned, and a new aero package, new everything. And Yamaha has already used up all of the allotted aeros they're allowed to use for the season. So none of the riders who are riding the current inline 4 can just jump on the V4 during the season. It has little to nothing to do with the engine, and more about what's around the engine. They've used too many wings. They got no more wings. So they're stuck with the inline 4 for the rest of the season. And the first time that our main MotoGP Yamaha heroes will be riding it is at the end of the season test in preparation for 2026. Now, another thing I want to address is I saw some people say, well, why bother with making this V4, the 1000cc V4? They're just going to have to throw the entire thing away when we change regulations in 2027. That ain't how it works, y'all. They don't just throw it away. Going from 1000 cc's to 850 cc's isn't that much. It's not that much of a difference, especially when you're talking about a 4-cylinder V4 engine. The engine gets shrunk down a little bit. The engineers know how to do this. They're very, very smart, well-paid people. They know how to do these things. And this weekend, Gigi Dall'Igna from Ducati says, you know what, forget the new regulations, forget the aero size, the fuel, the engine, all that stuff. The most important thing that is going to dictate who wins the championship in 2027 and beyond are the Pirelli tires. Everything else, he believes, at least in their garage, they can handle. And the other teams can handle. No one's going to come out with a huge advantage or non-advantage based off of the current package. They're going to shrink the whole thing down by, it isn't much, 1,000 cc's. Not 1,000 gallons, 1,000 cc's. 850 cc's, it's not that big of a difference. So no, motorcycle development just doesn't take the whole thing, put it in a bin, and then pull out the brand new 850cc and start from scratch. It's little incremental movements. First of all, what I just described would be so astronomically expensive, only the richest factors would be able to do it. No one would be able to afford to ride in MotoGP if every 10 years you had to take your entire project and just throw the entire thing in the garbage, whole cloth, and start over. Yes, new developing is expensive. What they're doing right now is very expensive, trying to develop basically the current bike on the grid and a new bike for 2027. Yes, it's all expensive, but just think about how much more it would be if you literally had to start with a blank sheet of paper. That's just not how it works. All right, finally, I want to talk about Marco Bezzecchi, because over the course of the last half of the season, he has been the standout rider in MotoGP. And if he could have started this strong, if this maybe wasn't his first season on that Aprilia, and maybe the Aprilia was a little better from the start, we know that even Jorge Martin was like, where's the door? How can I get out of here? And Marco Bezzecchi was very nervous at the beginning of the year about what they were asking him to do, especially since Martin was out and he was the only guy flying that flag. If he would have started out this season the way he is currently riding, I fully think he would be fighting for number 2 in the championship. I don't think he has enough to fight with Marc Marquez week in and week out to take over that number 1 spot, but fighting Alex, 100%. Fighting Pecco, Bez is riding out of his mind. He's gelled with that bike. The bike is working great, and he is the only one. If you look at this weekend, Marc and Bezzecchi, not Marco Bezzecchi, the two riders, Marc Marquez and Marco Bezzecchi, finished the race almost 8 seconds ahead of Alex Marquez on Ducati, still the 2024 arguably the best bike on the grid. And Marco's beating him by 8 seconds. Now, yes, this is Misano. This is Marco Bezzecchi's backyard. He knows this track maybe better than any other rider. He's cut a lot of laps since he was this big. That is, we can talk about that all you want, but you cannot argue that Marco Bezzecchi's pace, race form, one lap speed has been phenomenal over the last month of the season. And I think going into next year, he's going to be one of Marc Marquez's prime rivals. I think next year when Marc is looking across the paddock going, who's my rival? It's going to be Marco Bezzecchi, Jorge Martin, his brother Alex, and then we'll see where people like Pecco Bagnaia and Fabio Quartararo shake out. It will depend a lot on the bike and the confidence. Pedro Acosta maybe is the next tier underneath them, but I think it really feels like it's like Marco Bezzecchi and then kind of everyone else after him, even Alex. And that has said a lot for how good Alex has started and how good he's ridden just consistently on the podium every freaking weekend. But Marco Bezzecchi is really impressed. I didn't know he had it in him. I thought moving to factory Aprilia was a gamble for him. Was it the best factory? He was on the best bike over at Ducati. He was not going to get that factory Ducati like he wanted. He wanted to be a factory rider. He put his money where his mouth is, and boy, has it really paid dividends for that dude. He's riding fantastic, and I really hope he can continue that into the flyaway races at tracks he's not quite as familiar with, and also at tracks that Aprilia isn't quite as good at. I've said all year long, I'm the biggest Aprilia hater. They only go good at 3 tracks, and Marco Bezzecchi is the one that seems to be proving me wrong week in and week out. So hats off to him and the wooden leg. I mean, if we want another Rossi, we want another personality in MotoGP to put butts in the seats, I'm telling you, Marco Bezzecchi is the guy. Marc Marquez has started to become that guy. He's loosened up. He's no longer the boring stuffed shirt Honda guy who just kind of toes the company lines and says the same 4 things in every press conference. So Marc is giving us some personality finally. I think Pedro Acosta has a ton of personality. I think Fabio Di Giannantonio, Fabio Quartararo, and here Marco Bezzecchi with the wooden leg, with the Dainese boot, running around the Italian Grand Prix. I haven't seen that movie. I doubt you've seen that movie, but I appreciate the niche call out. I love a good niche callback. So thank you, Marco. Thank you for bringing a little bit of joy. And now you have to one-up it. Get yourself back on the top step of a podium, and let's see another, not Rossi-esque, Bezzecchi-esque celebration. All right, thank you so much for joining me for Monday Morning MotoGP. Stick around tomorrow for I Told You So Tuesday, where we talk about what my pre-race predictions were and whether or not I did a good job. See you tomorrow.